The immortal John Hancock here, and today I'm going to be sharing with you the top retro gaming consoles that I collect. I've been collecting a long time, about 30 years, and I cover everything on my YouTube channel from Atari to Xbox. And in today's video, I thought I'd share with you what top retro gaming consoles I collect. I'm going to be focusing on the libraries of each of these consoles, as there's many hardware options out there to game with these. And so it is from the collector's perspective, so have that in mind when I'm giving this list. Up first is the Sega Dreamcast. I really enjoy collecting this console. I experienced it back at Dreamcast launch. Yes, I worked at a GameStop back then and got to experience this game, Soul Calibur, on a Dreamcast kiosk for the first time, and it still looks amazing today, whether you're gaming on original hardware or using a VGA adapter or playing on a CRT. I can't believe that this console is 20 years old, but I still think it holds up, and it's a good example where it's not too old and still it has a lot of horsepower to provide some amazing 3D gaming and 2D gaming. Also, I like about this is that it has lots of homebrew support, and so that's important for some of these consoles that I'm going to be talking about today. They're still active. There's still games being made for these classic consoles, and that's pretty cool. Up next is Sony PlayStation, and I collect PlayStation for very different reasons. And so PlayStation covered every genre and then some. You know, while there was some shovelware on this console because it was so successful, there's many classics you can't get anywhere else. Some of the 3D games haven't aged as well as others, but the RPGs and a lot of the 2D style games are fantastic. Highly recommend if you're, and maybe you grew up past PlayStation when it came out, this is a great console to revisit. And what's great is you can play PlayStation 1 games on PS2. Also, if you have a PlayStation 3, you are able to play PlayStation 1 games. Some people still don't know that. Amazing console, wide variety of games, and it's everywhere. That's the other thing. Many of the consoles that I talk about today is availability. What can you get in 2020? And so right now, I think that there's many classic consoles out there, and really my list today is focusing on the more common ones because of availability or because the library of games is so diverse. Up next is a favorite of mine, Sega Genesis. I'm a huge Sega Genesis fan, and I've been so since the launch of this console, in which I earned it with my own money. Sega Genesis was a little bit more edgier than Nintendo back in the day, and it had an amazing library. So if you're a fan of 16-bit games, look no further than Sega Genesis. An advantage of collecting for Sega Genesis is the clamshell cases for the games. They hold up a lot better than cardboard. Sonic 2 being an amazing game, great two-player game by the way, but there's so many other classics. I cover many of them on my channel. Many of Sega's iconic characters got their start on the Sega Genesis, and it's available in many game stores and pawn shops. The other thing about Sega Genesis that I like is that it is a little bit cheaper collecting than Nintendo. There's a lot of people that are pursuing Nintendo products, and so Sega is a little bit less desirable, at least on the West Coast, and so Sega Genesis games, especially if there's like a version of the Genesis versus Nintendo, typically, not all the time, but typically the Sega Genesis version is cheaper. So if you're on a budget, this might be another way to go, especially if you collect loose cart. Up next is Gamecube, and Gamecube had some of my favorite Star Wars games on it. Star Wars Rogue Leader is the reason I purchased the Gamecube when it came out. And I love that Gamecube has a very, very solid library. You know, it wasn't as robust as its competitor, the PlayStation 2, but I think there's a lot of great games on Gamecube. Super Monkey Ball comes to mind, another launch title that I loved playing back in the day. Gamecube offered something different, and I like that the fact that you could play Gamecube games on a Nintendo Wii. Great library and lots of great classics Nintendo made for this, as well as many others. I love collecting for the Atari 2600. Now I collect many other classic consoles, but overall, the chances of you going to a game store or pawn shop and you're looking for pre-Nintendo games, you're going to find Atari 2600. Atari 2600 is cool because all the boxes from different companies look different, different colors. The carts are different shapes. I love collecting this console for many reasons. Tons of hits, lots of classics, a lot of great simple arcade ports. Single screen is a lot of the games in which you're playing for a score. I absolutely enjoy the homebrew market for the Atari 2600 as well. If you go on Atari Age, there's many classics in their store for the 2600. Another way to go too is if you purchase an Atari 7800, which didn't have a big library, you're able to get the benefits of better graphics, and it's backwards compatible with 2600. So that's another way to go, as I'm a huge fan of the Atari 7800 as well. Well, you can't have this list without talking about the original Nintendo Entertainment System. Huge library, tons of iconic Nintendo characters got their start on the NES, as well as third-party support. The list goes on and on. Mario, Metroid, and Zelda are all represented on the Nintendo Entertainment System, and some of the best games of my childhood are remembered being played on the NES. And so that's it. I mean, really, if you go loose cart, you can save a lot of money. There's lots of hardware options and aftermarket and clone consoles to play NES games. And so one option is to go with the retro USB AVS, and it looks great on a modern day television set. Or you can just go old school and play on a CRT. Like I said, there's many hardware options to play these classic consoles, and it doesn't matter. What works for you is great. Next is a huge one, and that's the PlayStation 2. And this is a big, emerging retro gaming console. I define a retro gaming console as something that's 10 years or older, and I can't believe this is coming up on 20 years. And so the PlayStation 2 had a wide variety of games, and it's kind of like the Dreamcast or the Gamecube. It offered a nice balance between great graphics, not too old, not too new. The entire game was on the disc. Hey, remember those days? And it is available in many game stores and pawn shops. There's lots of different ways of experiencing a PlayStation 2. While the PS2s are fairly available now, you also have the backwards compatible PS3. The first gen PS3s were able to play PlayStation 2 games. It looks great. There's cables and adapters as well that you can use a PlayStation 2 on a modern day HD TV. The thing about PlayStation 2 is, like the PlayStation 1, it covered everything and it was solid. There was game compilations, RPGs, the list goes on. Resident Evil, Metal Gear Solid. You name a franchise, it's probably on the PlayStation 2, and it's a decent version of that. And so I really like the PlayStation 2 library. Yes, it was very successful and there was shovelware, but there's many classics, and if you haven't dug into the library of the PlayStation 2, it's rich and diverse, and I highly recommend it. Next up is a 16-bit powerhouse, and that's the Super Nintendo. And Super Nintendo complete and box games have gone way up. If you want to save some money, definitely going the loose cart route. Many of the franchises that Nintendo offered on its original console were beefed up and upgraded for the Super Nintendo. And that's a lot of people say that why they collect Super Nintendo is that it offers some better gaming experiences than the original NES franchises. Some, not all. I love the RPGs on the Super Nintendo, and some of my favorite side-scrolling action games, such as Super Ghouls and Ghosts comes to mind, Magic Sword, the list goes on and on. Simply amazing library, tons of games, well over 700 in the US, and so this is a great console to collect for, as well as the homebrew support. Next up is the original Xbox, and I love the fact that the Xbox One can play some Xbox games. The Xbox 360 can play many more original Xbox games, but I think the original Xbox offered a wide variety of games. I really like the Star Wars games on the original Xbox, as well as the Halo games. Knights of the Old Republic is probably my favorite on the library. I know it's offered in other places as well. But, playing that backwards compatible, even on the original Xbox One, it looks fantastic. And so I really enjoy the Xbox library. It's fun to go back and kind of revisit maybe some games that have been overlooked. There's many franchises on the original Xbox that have kind of fallen into obscurity. Typically, you can find Xbox games very cheap, and this is another console that you're going to find at pawn shops and game stores with a wide variety of games. They're not going to be typically as picked over as some of the other consoles I mentioned today. Last and definitely not least is Nintendo 64, and I like to collect the Nintendo 64 for very different reasons. First and foremost, it's all about the top 20 with the N64 library. Overall, I don't think the Nintendo 64's library is the best. However, I think its top 20 is fantastic, and people that typically get into collecting this gaming console, it's all about the top 20. GoldenEye, Perfect Dark, Super Mario 64, Conker's Bad Fur Day. The list goes on and on, but you know, typically Nintendo first-party games as well as Rare, they made some amazing games for this console, and it's worth collecting those to play and collect. And so there you have it. There's my list. What is your list? Your list may be different than mine. What are you currently collecting and recommending? What are you finding at game stores? Comment below, as I always appreciate your comments. Keep it positive. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and click the bell for upcoming videos as I upload every week. You folks are wonderful and beautiful. This is the Immortal John Hancock. You take care.